right. Welcome, Elaine. Thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
Oh, I love being here, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk with you. Like I just told you, I've been stalking your website, figuring out all the good questions to ask you. So I would love for you to introduce yourself to our audience and tell us about all the roles you've played in your career and how that's kind of influenced where you are today.
Yes, well, I'm Elaine Turner. I'm from Texas, so I'm born and bred Texan. Um, and I've gone through recently a huge career shift where I had 20 years I was in the fashion retail business, and I've just recently, about a year and a half ago, have transformed and moved over to personal growth. So really utilizing my experience with women in fashion retail and servicing women, mentoring women, managing women. I own and ran the company. I sort of felt this deep desire to really take what I had learned and take those lessons with women and kind of come into I like to kind of like a new aspect of myself from what I've learned, the wisdom I've gained, and sort of offer up that wisdom to women and build women up. So it seems like this huge difference. Like a lot of people are like, how did you go from fashion to empowering women in this way? But it really isn't as big a jump because my business was solely focused on empowering women through clothing and fashion and body image issues and all that. So it's really been a little more seamless than I think people probably think from the outside.
Yeah, I can imagine. It does seem similar for sure. So why is your thing is self-worth? Like why is helping women discover their self-worth? Like why is that so important to you?
Well, really, ultimately, I think it's the foundation of everything. I think everything is built upon knowing that we are sourced from a place of wholeness, right? So knowing that it's sort of like lack, versus abundance. Really, it's a scarcity versus enoughness. So I think if you in your life feel like you're walking through your life half of yourself, then everything that you do, every choice you make, every leadership decision, being a mother, being a wife, being a friend, is not going to be from a wholehearted place. And so I really look at worth as an inherent, eternal, divine birthright. And I think once women adopt this as there's nothing outside of myself. So regardless of anything that I do, any accomplishment, any failure, catastrophic failure, divorce, or business that didn't work, or lost friendships, or whatever it is, that you are inherently whole, inherently enough, and nothing really can alter that. And so I think until we as women truly adopt this place from abundance, then we're free to fall, we're free to fail, we're free to stumble, all while knowing that we'll never give up because we know we're essentially whole, we know we're good, so we know we can rise up. And I think that that's something that I think, especially as women, it gets really muddied for us. We are very caught up into the external of people pleasing, outside expectations, perfectionism, nurturing others before ourselves, and we lose that sense of, well, who am I in this whole matrix of life?
Exactly. Yeah. And I love
It
how you
gets
talk
deep.
about that right now, because so many in our audience are going through career change and setbacks from the pandemic and everything. So the message of we can rise up is I think really good right now.
Absolutely. And I think there's something really inherent in the idea of, I like to look at it like if God gave us the weakness to fall, then he also gave us the strength to rise, right? And I think what happens as women is we lose sight of that strength to rise after any fall. We get we forget our resiliency. And I think we begin to start thinking that we have to live in reaction mode to what happens to us rather than really knowing that we do have a sense of internal worth and control over how we show up within our challenges, right? I think sometimes we get into this place where like we feel helpless, but really I think we have an opportunity to ask ourselves, well, who can I become within this challenge rather than the victim of the challenge, right?
Yeah, I love that. Who can I be now because of this?
Right. Well, yeah, my whole life's been that.
Yeah. So what are some examples of, instead of living in reaction mode, that our listeners can do instead of, what are some examples that you've seen?
I mean, I think first off, I'm a huge proponent of grace, right? We're all human, and let's be blunt, most all of us go through periods where we're living in reaction mode because we're trying to survive, right?
Yeah.
We're dealing with children, or our business demands, or whatever it is, an ill parent or whatever. And so I don't want people to think that I have all the answers. I mean, I've kind of had a hard day today. I mean, I walk through the earth just as vulnerable and fragile as anybody else. But I think when it comes to living in reaction mode, I really believe that the source of how you combat that is through awareness. It's really about being aware. First and foremost, 80% of it is I am living in reaction mode. And once you can address that, name it, like, I know I'm doing this, I'm surviving, I'm living in reaction mode. Then I think you can bring that objectivity around that. You can bring the awareness, and you can decide, kind of soften your lens towards it. Say, okay, now I can know, how do I take those steps, those, even if they're slow steps, to really take compassionate action, of how I can start to see things more clearly, how I can be more mindful and thoughtful within my reactions with other people, with what's happening to me. I think it's really hard because I think people don't realize how they go through life so unaware. They just think it's just happening to them, when in reality, we're all a real big piece of the puzzle of all of these, um, reciprocities and mutualities of all the things, all the interpersonal relationships that we have. It's not just everything's coming at us. Yes, things happen to us, they're out of our control, but we are a definite part of how we're showing up within that. And so I really go back to awareness. You have to bring awareness to what's going on in your life. And when you start seeing a thread, right, of some things that might be detrimental, whether it's, some hardships at work, or some difficult conversations, or some failed relationships, or whatever, it's okay to bring a softness and compassion around that and say, okay, this is happening. How can I bring myself more awareness around this, and decide how I really want to engage in this from a place of compassion, self-compassion for myself and for others? Because once you're compassionate towards yourself, you're easily more compassionate towards other people. So I really, everything, and I'm going to bring that up a lot. You might feel a little redundant, but so much for me goes back to self-awareness, is how you combat living in reaction mode.
Yeah. So how do you become more aware? Like, how do you, like in your daily life, are you doing this every day? Is there like a time in a routine you have? Because to me, when
Right.
I'm in reaction mode, I'm like, I don't have any time. Like,
I'm surviving.
yeah.
I do think that some days you aren't going to have time, and you're going to have to also just chalk that up as one of those reactive surviving days. But I think if you can carve out, and I tell women this because I think it seems so intimidating for a lot of people, but if you can just carve out 5 to 10 minutes a day, and I like to call it a stillness practice or a contemplative practice. And it doesn't have to be meditation. I don't like to build walls around what that looks like for you. But if you do some of that inner work, and you think about, what do I need right now? That's one of my big things and questions I pose to women that I think can transform your life, is asking yourself, when you know that you're in a state of suffering or reactivity, what do I need right now that could offer me a sense of security, a sense of stillness, a sense of wholeness? And it could be, I need a nap. I need a really connected call with someone that I love deeply. I need to journal. I need free floating journaling. I need to get all this mind dump out of my head. I need to, it could be, I need the stillness. I need a meditation. I need reflectivity. I need a real serious mindfulness practice, whatever it looks like. For me, it's restorative yoga. I do a lot of restorative yoga. I mean, I try to do it every day, but if I don't, I at least do it 3 times a week. So that's my thing, because it brings the body into the equation, because, we're such a top-down society. Everything's so much about our brain, but really our body is a second intelligence. Our body is there to heal us in it knows before the mind. It really
Yeah.
does. So for me, it's restorative yoga and journaling. I'm also a huge reader. It gets my mind off of my own world, and I learn something about something else. But it could be something totally different. It's not a one size fits all model. I mean, it could be, for some people, I really believe if it's sleeping, it's because your body needs to sleep. don't fight it, And so I think that it can be so many different things for so many people, but it's really about carving out, those 10 minutes. It can be 10 minutes a day where you know that you are in relationship with yourself.
Yeah, so good. So I want to move into talking about limiting beliefs, because I know that's something that you are you know a lot about. And when I was reading your website too, I noticed your rock bottom moment as well with your daughter and the story of not being good enough. And I'd love if you could share that with us too.
Yeah, I've been through a lot of chronic challenges in my life, and I have a special needs daughter who's 16, and she's been a real gateway for me of sort of understanding some of my own wounds, right, and some of the things that I need to bring healing around. And she and I have had a journey together that has really been, people always think like, oh, well, then you're her caretaker. And so she really learns from you. But really, life doesn't work that way. It's really both of us in a mutual reciprocal relationship. If I learn just as much about myself through her as I think she does through me. And really, that story was about when I shut my last store down. I had a big retail operation where I designed and manufactured all of my own luxury goods. I had 12 stores at one time. And we just got into a position, my husband and I, who ran it together, and decided this wasn't really sustainable, from an emotional or financial point of view. It just, retail had shifted, where women were really transferring more into the digital age. And we were at a size where we weren't really able to pivot in a way to restructure the whole business when we were really structured on a retail platform. So anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But it was a really devastating time for me. I went through a huge identity crisis, like, who am I now? What's going on? And that moment when I picked my daughter up from school, and I hadn't really told her what had happened just because I was kind of dealing with it on my own. I don't think I was quite ready to process it with her. And she looked at me and she said, well, Mom, why are you picking me up all of a sudden? Because I had a nanny pick her up because I worked during the day. And I said, well, and I thought, well, this is good a time as any. And I just said, I shut down Elaine Turner. And she just looked straight at me in her very literal, beautiful way and said, well, that's too bad. I really love the pink, because I have a lot of pink.
Yeah.
And, I love the bags and everything you did, but I love you more. And I love being with you. And for some reason, her putting it so simply to me, and I realized, I don't need to be all those things to be whole. Like, I thought, you buy into it, like, oh yeah, I got this. I own a company, but then I look at this child who knows more than I do my worth, who looks at me and says, oh, well, you're my mom. I love you just the way it did. We don't need that. You know, we can show up however we want, and we're whole. And so that really kind of sent me down this path of like, well, how do I offer this to other women to know that your job isn't you, your marriage isn't you, your children aren't you. I know that's so hard for some women to accept, but they're not. They are a part of your story, and they're a part of your interrelational sort of view of yourself. But you are this eternal divine being who is whole and here for a reason and here for a purpose. And I just think that we decide we are all the roles, right, outside of us, instead of realizing that the roles are not the truth of who we are. They're a part of what we do on the earth and how we go about learning, right? Because so much of how we learn is through others and what we do and our failures and our accomplishments, but it's not really the truth of who we are. And I think that that's something really important for women to understand, because I think that we get very caught up in our outside identities. And
Yeah.
it puts us down a really, really fragile road, right?
Yeah, definitely. A mom of two right now as well. So I'm like, uh-huh, nodding as you're saying
You're like, oh, help me. Yeah.
it. So
How old are they?
2 and 6. Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Two
they're little.
two girls.
Okay.
Yeah. 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. Yeah. So I've gone through this journey myself too, of figuring out, what my purpose is in work, and also as a mom,
Yeah.
homeschooling mom now, apparently
Yeah.
new
I know.
this year.
I know that's been
Um,
a fun pivot.
yeah, definitely. So yeah, figuring out my purpose is something I'm passionate about teaching as well. And we talk a lot about that too. So how does someone, who's doing everything for everyone else, how do they take that second to really identify what their purpose is, what they should be
Right.
doing.
Well, I think that when it comes to purpose and kind of our offering, if you will, I think that number one, it's not, there's no guide, right? There's no three-step process, but I think if I had to kind of boil it down, I think it's really about maybe the idea of doing the inner work and deciding that you want to build some awareness and accountability and really authenticity around who you are, your natural tendencies, how you show up in the world. We're all unique, we're all connected, but we're not all the same. And I think that's really important is once you start to realize, who am I, and start to explore that. It's not always easy work, but you start to explore that. Then you can awaken to some of the limiting beliefs and narratives and falsehoods that you've attached yourself to, and really start to rewrite and flip that script of, wait a minute, why have I always felt like I was a burden? Or why have I always felt like I wasn't enough? And really start to look at that for what it is and realize, number one, so much of that is not our fault. So much is detrimental cultural conditioning, other people's opinions, unrealistic expectations that are put upon us as women. And I think a lot of those, I won't go too deep into this because it's really deep work, but a lot of that is early childhood programming and wounds that we kind of attach ourselves to. And then it shows up in a variety of ways as we age. But once you start to look at that stuff and really start to excavate it and deconstruct it, then I think you can kind of get out of your own way and start to really wrap yourself in compassion and start to give yourself that, how do I even describe, because grace is so important to me, but it's just like this, it's like never ending infinite grace. We have to give ourselves grace and start to see, maybe it's not so much about my resume or my skill set. I think a lot of women look at their purpose and they think, well, what am I good at? And that's what my purpose is. Well, maybe you could look at it a different way. Maybe you could say, yeah, I have some superpowers, I have some strengths, but really, what community am I the most passionate about serving? I think when I have looked at my life and I have looked at it from that perspective, rather than I'm a good speaker, I'm a good writer, or I'm good at fashion, when I've looked at it as who am I here to serve, that's when I feel like the journey has fallen much more in place for me rather than a technical skill set, right? Because you're going to learn the skills once you know who you want to serve. So if you want to serve the elderly, you might not have a degree in geriatrics, but that's your passion, that there's this purpose and reason, then you're going to figure out how to serve the elderly, right? And for me, it's women. It always has been. And, there's been lots of different vehicles and ways that I've wanted to serve women. Now it's a little different than it was before it was through fashion. But, once you know who I want to serve, I really think the universe lines up behind you. And I think that's a really, when I talk about purpose and I talk about manifestation, I really like to look at it as coming from that source. Who am I here to serve, and how do I get out of my own way and start? Because I think so much of us, we're so caught in our minds. We convince ourselves that we're not worthy, when in reality, once we can do that inner work and we realize we are worthy, then we can show up from a place of, we can actually be, I think, rather than, I think so much of life is actually becoming and being who you want to be, rather than like saying it or even doing it. You have to show up as the truth of who you are. And I think that's when your purpose and all of those things start to line up, because I think we get muddied. I think we get confused that, well, maybe since so-and-so told me I was good at this, then that's my purpose. But in reality, I think it's much deeper than that. And I also think purpose can be a really heavy loaded idea for people. I think people can become really burdened by the idea of what's my purpose. But I think that if you just go into that place of like, be who you are made to be, and have faith in the truth of who you are, but you got to do some work along the way, and I think that that's key to manifestation and purpose and all of those things.
Yeah. And when you focus on who you're here to serve too, I feel like it takes the pressure off too.
Yeah.
It's like, even us talking here, we're not nervous because we know it's helping someone, right? It's serving someone. And for me, it like takes off the nerves when you can figure out who you're serving too, and you can just be yourself.
Oh, so great. I agree.
So The last question I want to ask you, because you've gone through a lot of change, and that's kind of what our audience is kind of going through right now too. How do you make confident decisions, like those big decisions you had to make, huge ones you had to make? How did you know that? How did you make those decisions confidently?
I think decisions, it's like we walk through life making a million decisions a day that we're not even conscious of, right? Um, but I think that at the heart of really sort of strong decision making is, again, having that awareness. There's this quote I wanted to, because when I loved your topics, but there's this quote by Viktor Frankl. I'm going to read it to you really quickly. It's between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom as human beings. So when you go through life and you're thinking about these decisions, number one is consciousness that, oh, I'm making a decision right now. Like an example is I got an email today that was really triggering. So I had to make a decision of how I was going to respond to that, right? And I know you might think, well, I'm talking about big, like who should I marry? But really life is just a series of choices, and then we live with the consequences of those choices. So I had to create that space to pull back from that email and know my natural tendencies are I'm very emotional. So I tend to process things through my heart. Well, a lot of people don't. A lot of people process things in their head or in their body. So I knew that I wasn't going to react in that moment because it would be like, okay, that hurt my feelings, or it might not be received. And it doesn't mean that I don't need to be honest and truthful about who I am. I should have no shame around that I'm more of a feeling person. But you also want to communicate that in a way that will be heard and received from whoever you're communicating to. So when I start to think about confident decisions, it's creating that space of knowing who you are and how you react to things, right? That's the first thing, is having that self-awareness. The next big thing I would say is making sure that you use all parts of yourself when you're making a decision. So like for me today, I didn't just make it through my heart. I went to my head and I went into my body. Allow yourself to use all parts of yourself when you decide you want to make a really big decision, like if you're going to buy a house or if you're dating someone or whatever it is. Don't just be in reaction mode to what your default mode is. Like, oh, I just always, I go into denial, or I just don't really decide I'm going to process that. Be aware of that. Go, oh, I'm doing that right now. So I'm going to access another part of me. Or go to that person you love and trust more on the earth that is different than you, that processes, and ask them, say, hey, look, like I said, feeling it this way, or I'm saying, how do you see this for me? Someone that you really trust. I really believe in trusted advisors. We always, probably a lot of us have at least one. Um, and then, I'm also kind of basic about decisions. Like, I really believe in like writing stuff down, like pros and cons, and allowing the mind to get logical about it. Cause I know I'm so feeling that I need sometimes to get really tactical and logical about how I'm going to make decisions. But I guess my big three are self-awareness, and use all parts of yourself, and have a trusted advisor. You need someone that has some objectivity. Sometimes we're all too close to things. Like if we're managing people in our home. I know with my daughter, our therapist, she saves us because she's more objective. She's not living with Marley. So she helps us in a way that brings objectivity around our situation. So I would say those three things, and really, and I don't want to get too woo. I don't know a ton about your listeners, but allowing yourself to maybe also get more engaged with your intuition. I'm a really big believer of our intuition, and doing practices that allow you the space to access your intuition. And this all takes time. That's the thing about life, is there's not any quick fixes, right? We all have to do that work. And I think you're right when you said, but yeah, we're so busy, and but then you also say, what choice do I have? I have to carve out a certain amount of time for me to show up in this life a more evolved, transformed human, because we're here to learn. So we can't just stay in reaction mode. I mean, there's times in our lives where we're busier than other times. You have young kids, so, but there's also still opportunity in those times to give yourself that gift of awareness and stillness. There is. It just has to be done in a very unique way for you. It might be at midnight, I don't
Yeah.
know. But, so I would say those three things on decisions is your intuition
Awesome.
and all those things. So
Awesome. So where can our listeners find out more about you, Elaine?
So my website is a good start, elaineturner.com. I'm very active on Instagram and LinkedIn. So if anybody is interested in, um, taking e-courses from me, I'm in between launches right now. I'm getting ready to launch my Discover course again this spring. And then I also am doing one-on-one coaching, especially for women leaders, because I ran a company for 20 years. So I focus a lot on leadership because I think that that's a huge opportunity for women in the marketplace, is to really empower women to really believe in their leadership qualities. Because I think we question a lot of that. But yeah, it would be Instagram, LinkedIn, and my website.
Awesome. So what is your final words of wisdom to someone who, what do you want to share with our listeners about being worthy and being leaders right now? Final last thoughts.
I would say that knowing that regardless of what's happening outside of you, you're worthy. And I think we get very caught up in our culture of attaching ourselves to false narratives that really have nothing to do with us, that are um, outside of us, whether that's meeting other people's expectations or people pleasing or a cultural idea that we should adhere to. And I also think separating yourself from your successes and your failures and knowing that you're here for something greater. It's not just about what happens to you, it's about knowing who you are within that, and knowing that you still are the whole eternal, incredible human being within your challenge. You're not your challenge. Be careful to identify with your challenges, and your challenges are not your identity.
I love that. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all of your wealth of knowledge and experience with us.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate you having me.
Yes, definitely. Thanks.
Okay, bye.
Bye.